scientist in USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. Welcome to this very special session for AgriLinks to honor the 2020 and 2021 World Food Prize laureates. I'm here with my colleague Mike Michener, who will join us later. Mike is Deputy Assistant to the Administrator for Resilience and Food Security, and he will be talking to 2020's laureate, Dr. Rattan Lal of Ohio State University. And it is my great pleasure to start us off in a conversation with the 2021 laureate, Dr. Shakuntala Thilsted, who is the global lead for nutrition and public health at World Fish, which is part of the One CGIAR system. Welcome, Shakuntala. It's a real pleasure and congratulations.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure being here, and it's a pleasure to have this conversation with you, as we've done for so many years.
Exactly. We've known each other a long time, so this is a real treat for, I know, for me.
And for me, too.
So we're going to start out, we're going to have an informal conversation, but we have some questions in mind that we want to kind of follow the journey, the amazing journey that Shakuntala has done over more than 3 decades. And Shakuntala, by the time you first came to Bangladesh more than 30 years ago, many aspects of the Green Revolution were running, and really changing lives, and the cereal staple yields of wheat and rice were rising. But you saw that the job was far from done. And can you describe for us the challenges you observed among the rural poor, which at that time were the great majority of the population?
Of course, we didn't have the urban migration as we have today. 30 years ago, Bangladesh was a champion in the Green Revolution. You had IRI, International Rice Research Institute, working very closely with BIRI, Bangladesh Rice Research Institute, producing high-yielding rice varieties, and the spread across the country was enormous, and everyone benefited. And as years went by and the populations in Bangladesh grew, Bangladesh is always proud every year to say that our rice production exceeds our local consumption. So tremendous progress. However, if you look at how that progress was made in Bangladesh, of course, much came out from having high-yielding varieties, using inputs such as fertilizer and pesticides. But the evidence shows that the largest factor to that increase in rice production was bringing in new areas under production. So the areas under production increased. But that was the expense. That was at the expense, for example, of wetlands, because you had to dry out the areas, you had to divert waters, you had to create more land to produce rice. And that meant the whole ecology of large parts of the rural areas changed to the detriment of fish production. So the government has realized this, and there are now steps for rehabilitation of some of the wetlands, rehabilitation of the canals and channels that are used for migration to fish. How you're going to stop the spread of taking more land because you need roads, you need more land for houses. Right. That's a dilemma, but that has changed the production system in Bangladesh. So where you got a greater production of rice, you got a less production of captive fisheries because the change was so great.
So there were real trade-offs.
Yes.
So tell us about what you learned in terms of how diets could drastically change child health and growth outcomes for the better. You've also found that maternal nutrition and connections to breastfeeding were also crucial. These were amazing insights. Can you tell us more about how you did this?
Well, if you look at the literature and you look at the practices and the recommendations we have, we have amazing recommendations and programs and progress within infant and young child feeding. But our focus started at the age of 6 months, at the age of recommendation for complementary feeding, when you would supplement breast milk with food. So that's where we put all our efforts, and that was great. And in Western countries, for example, the private sector saw a really good space for producing products for children at 6 months of age. Where we didn't focus was the period before, from conception until the 6 months of age of the child. So that's the 9 months of pregnancy and the 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding.
It's a big chunk of the thousand days.
Exactly. Okay. And the focus there, since the child isn't yet born, and in the first 6 months, the recommendation is exclusive breastfeeding. Therefore, the full focus should be on the pregnant woman,
right,
and thereafter the breastfeeding woman. But that was not done. If I've thought a lot about it, and I really wouldn't know what to say is the reason, but I did once a small field break where we ask women, we ask the mother-in-law of the woman and the husband of the woman each to create a plate of food that they think is insufficient for a pregnant woman, and then a plate of food that they think is sufficient for a breastfeeding woman. And it was amazing that they all had less food for the pregnant woman and more food for the breastfeeding woman. And when we asked, why is this so? They put more importance to the child rather than to the woman. The woman is not that prioritized.
They weren't thinking about the pregnancy going on.
They were thinking about, now the child is here and we have to keep this child well nourished. And so that the focus on the woman in pregnancy hasn't been there. And in many countries, not just Bangladesh, also, I would say perhaps even in some Western countries, it's like this. So what I did was try to change that and work on the diets of women and diets of women from conception to the first 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding. And that's where we developed convenient products as the fish chutney that could be used as a condiment in the meals of women. And they were superfoods.
Those micronutrients that are often lacking in the diets of the poor.
And essential fatty acids.
Exactly. So during the time you were doing this amazing work on child nutrition and health outcomes, other researchers in Bangladesh, like Martin Blom of Helen Keller International, showed that if rice prices went up, people cut out vegetables, dairy, eggs, all the quality foods that are micronutrient rich. Why are fish so critical in improving the affordability of quality diets? How do fish stand out?
So there are other evidence you can give. For example, if you would promote pond polyculture, and which is thereby increasing the diversity of fish in the pond, increasing production, productivity, increasing nutritional quality, and at the same time, you combine that with the nutrition-sensitive approach with nutrition messaging, then you'll be getting greater consumption at home and greater sale. And what we have seen in some projects that we have evaluated, and this is with chicken production. So the chickens and eggs are sold for income, and the money from the sale is used for buying food. And if you, with the correct nutrition messaging, you would see that you can the behavior can change. You can get people to use part of the income to buy more nutritious foods. But what you are saying is true, because if you are very poor, the first food you would think about is the staple food. And if you are using much more of your income for the staple food, then of course you have less income for the other foods. However, if you would have a diverse production system throughout the country, not just in this family, but throughout the whole country, throughout the whole rural populations, then you would have not only rice, but you would have other foods in the markets that can be used.
Sort of a buffer against shocks.
Yes, and also for the very poor, we need government programs.
So you mentioned behavior change. Our administrator, Samantha Power, USAID's administrator, is very excited about the potential of behavioral science. And can you say a bit more about what that looked like in your work that could help change the behaviors, particularly of families and women, and in terms of their diets?
And now we know even more. And we know that when we come with outside knowledge, that we also change behavior. And what we haven't been good at is combining traditional knowledge with new knowledge. It's all knowledge. It's very grounded knowledge, but it's traditional, indigenous knowledge combined with new knowledge. And if I would jump forward, I would say where we are with data technology today, we should be smart enough to be able to combine these two. What we've done lots of time with behavior, with our efforts of behavior change, we have replaced one with the other.
I see.
And that's not helpful.
We're missing an opportunity.
Yes, that's not helpful.
So many of us at USAID are proud of having been associated with your work, and I'm sure our counterparts in your other partners are equally proud. And helping us with insights on nutritional outcomes, especially for children and pregnant women, and taking those to scale. Can you tell us about the strategies you developed that you were enabled you to reach millions? What is left undone, and where do you see expanding opportunities for increasing fish foods in the diets of the poor in particular? So maybe starting with some of your work with AID missions, and then how
did we get there? Well, USAID has been extremely helpful and a very good partner in this.
Glad to hear that.
In moving from the very beginning to where we are today, and has supported this effort over a long period of time. So one of the first things I would say, if we want to begin, you need the investments and you need the support. And it's great to work with USAID because it's long-term support, and it's support that's substantial. If you would look at the Feed the Future programs that we have today. So that gives you the stability and gives you the ways and the channels to move forward and to build up a certain base from which you can then expand. Very often it's not like that. Very often you begin, you have a good idea and innovation, you start it. You do not have the time to get it completed, and then it's gone.
So those last miles.
Yes, it's important. And take our project on community fish refuge in Cambodia. USAID has seen the potential of this and has helped to move this along.
Tell us a little bit about how those work, the refuge.
And
what it means for the communities.
So if we would we did, and USAID was with us all the way with the pond polyculture from the beginning in Bangladesh, which has now moved to many countries in Asia and in Africa. But if I would take the one that I really liked is the community fish refuge in Cambodia. And that's why after spending many years it's because of that program, after spending many years in Bangladesh, I moved and posted myself in Cambodia and worked for 3 years in Cambodia on that project.
Wonderful.
Because I saw the opportunity.
And so what did those refugia do? They basically left a place for the fish to breed and thrive during the dry season?
Yes, and what was so important was the management of the refuge and how they were created. They were not created from outside. The first thing that was done were community groups were set up.
That initiative.
And they were given the knowledge, and their efforts were used to form the community fish refuge, and they manage the community fish refuge. One of the things that I did when I came in, and this was also with funding from USAID, the vegetables. We started growing vegetables on the banks of the community refuge. So you increase the diversity, but not only that, some of it was sold, and the money from the sale of vegetables were used to maintain the ponds. Wonderful. But importantly, I would like to say, is the role of governments, both national government and provincial governments. So these community fish refuge, a special day is given when the dry season starts and where you say, now these are extremely important in the landscape. And the king and the Buddhist priests, they go out and symbolically add some fish to the ponds. Wonderful. So everyone knows that you have to take special care.
Shared responsibility
of these community fish refuge. And it has worked magnificently. In less than 3 years, we've seen great increases in the production and productivity, as well as the diversity of species.
So then when the floods come, there's far more fish to move out.
Yes.
And add to the quality of the diets. Yes. And I love the fact that you mentioned the role of vegetables. And when we think about water, we think about fish, but you can also think about vegetables. Vegetables are 90% water.
So yes.
So
that's why also
that diet quality connection is great.
So that's also why I've worked so hard to change the narrative from fish to aquatic foods.
Okay.
Because you have animals, plants, and microorganisms like seaweed. And if you would take the diets of many countries and also the plate of food of many countries, I mean, in Western countries here, when you eat fish, you get a slab of fish muscle mass on your plate. You've traveled a lot. You see that's not the way fish is eaten in other countries. It's eaten in a dish, cooked with many other foods, especially vegetables and
sometimes
spices.
The small whole fish,
yes, exactly.
Which are very, very nutritious, right? Extra nutritious.
Superfoods.
Yes. So in terms of bringing the nutrition benefits we're talking about and the economic opportunities, you mentioned those as well, associated with increased consumption of fish by low-income people, especially, how can we gain even greater scale? Are there important lessons from your work that need to guide our thinking as we see more emergence of small and medium enterprises become involved in raising and marketing fish? What sort of transition is happening, and what does it need to be? What aspects need to be conserved in terms of the learnings from your work?
Well, if you would look at many development with respect to foods, but this development, we would like to use this development in the supply chains for nutritious foods.
Right.
We haven't reached there yet. And if you look across the world, we've used developments across the food systems from production to supply chains, but they are not, many of those foods are not nutritious. If we would use fish to produce and to develop fish-based products that are combinations of, small fish, for example, vegetables. You can have a product, a dry product with small fish, sweet potato, and that can be used as a supplementary food for
Right.
children. So I do think one of the developments we could use and bring in the private sector is development of convenient, nutritious, and safe foods for both women and children and for the whole population. And we are doing, and we are beginning to do this in the USAID funded project in Myanmar,
In Myanmar,
together
wonderful.
with a small private company.
Does what you're talking about open up employment opportunities?
Yes.
And what about, say, women and youth? We are so focused on these critical inclusion for women and youth.
And if I would give another example, going back to Cambodia, the small fish from the rice fields in the season of plenty, they are dried by women and they are used. And now there's a private company that's producing wafers filled with fish with fish mass from small fish. And because of the evidence we have of the importance of small fish for cognition and for growth and development, the government of Cambodia, as well as UNICEF in Cambodia, has declared that fish powder can replace milk powder 100% in the treatment of malnourished children. So that gives you great opportunity for developing products and for expanding the markets of fish.
And am I right in thinking that when you're talking about these small fish, there's almost no waste?
None at all.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, we
and that's important because the parts of the fish or any foods for that matter
Right.
that are traditionally wasted are the parts that are most nutritious.
Right.
We know that also from fruit and vegetables.
Well, that's great. Well, we've talked a lot about Asia this morning, and of course, many incredibly exciting and transformative things have happened and are happening there. What about Africa? Tell us what do you see as is there unrealized potential there that is going to change things in Africa the way we saw changes happen in Asia?
Amazing opportunities. Just look at the Great Lakes areas of Africa, the coastlines of many countries, and the wetlands. I mean, when we work in Nigeria, the government does not at all talk about wetlands.
Join you, take a sip.
The government talks only about aquaculture, and aquaculture of one fish species, no diversity, catfish.
Right.
When you look at the map of Nigeria, you see that more than 7% of the land mass is wetlands. And this is true.
And that's a big country, so that's a lot of water.
Yeah. So we have great opportunities from the examples that you have seen in Cambodia to move those, have South-South collaboration and move those examples and those approaches into Africa.
Now, this is one of the great aspects of World Fish and the CGIAR generally, to be having partners across these regions that enable that exchange of information and perhaps the adaptation, not necessarily just transfer, but the way you talk.
Adaptation and then adoption.
Right, with local communities, again, coming together to think about how are we going to manage these areas.
And Rob, I did that when I moved pond polyculture from Bangladesh to the Terai in Nepal. I took a group of 50 women, on a 1-week trip to Bangladesh to see how the pond polyculture was practiced in Bangladesh.
That's great to hear. And
I'd love to do the same between Cambodia and Bangladesh and Indonesia and all the places where we are having successes in Asia. It would be great to have this South-South collaboration between Africa and Asia.
Well, that's exciting to hear because we know Africa there's huge growth occurring. Populations are growing. The poverty is not, and undernutrition are not going down as fast there as they are in some other areas. So we really want to look for these unrealized opportunities for enhancing the quality of the diets, but also for generating incomes, again, especially for women.
Yes.
And you're seeing that also in Africa?
And
These...
of course, because if you would just take the after production from end production to all the way to consumption, it's mainly women in Africa working in this sector. All the drying, smoking processes, sale into national and regional sale.
There's
and
very
trade.
well established trade
Yes,
routes
yes.
across Africa, I
And
believe.
much of this is work done by women. So there's great potential indeed. We just have to tap into it, and I do think we need the investments to begin the process. Then there needs to be a kickstart, and to do this, you need some degree of investment, and we must bring in the government and the policymakers, give them the knowledge that they should understand the potential that they have.
So the public and the private sector are both required here to come together. And that's, of course, an area where a lot of our USAID missions are especially interested in. On the one hand, what can we do policy-wise in partnership with our host countries where we're working, but then also, what are the opportunities for private capital to come in? Even at small and medium enterprises, especially, we're very excited. So it sounds like this is a real opportunity looking forward.
Yes.
Well, this has just been a real pleasure, Shakuntala, and I can't tell you how great it is to have your work recognized globally by this year's World Food Prize, and to really keep us focused on these human outcomes. And our administrator, Ambassador Power, has just said that we are recommitting to 20% reduction in extreme poverty and 20% reduction in child stunting in the areas where we work. And I think the kinds of things you've talked about show us how to make those connections so we can achieve both those goals.
And make them fast. It's not, we don't have to wait for 10, 20 years to get there. We have the opportunities now.
That's exciting to hear.
Yes.
So you think the time, so the 2030, we can do a lot.
We can do a lot.
That's a great message to end on today. And it's just such a pleasure, and congratulations
Thank
again.
You so much,
I'm just so happy for you and for all your colleagues at WorldFish and all the partners.
And the communities I work with.
Absolutely, the people that benefit most. So now we're going to turn to the 2020 laureate, Dr. Rattan Lal, and I'm going to turn, Shakuntala and I are going to exit, and my colleague Mike Michener, who is our Deputy Assistant to the Administrator for Resilience and Food Security, will be interviewing Dr. Lal.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome from Des Moines. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Dr. Thilsted. That was just fascinating. Just really enjoyed that conversation a lot. Dr. Lal, well, welcome, and huge congratulations to your win last year and to being present in Des Moines this year to accept your prize in person. Fortunately, that couldn't happen last year. But your body of work in soil fertility and soil health, it's just so timely right now. We have so many changes, food security challenges, environmental challenges, climate challenges, And your work that you've done throughout the years, it's just so timely right now and so apt. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you.
I thought we'd talk a little bit about Africa, and then maybe a few questions about climate change, and then back up and do a couple big picture questions. How does that sound?
Sounds very good, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning and to talk to you. It's really a pleasure, especially talk about green revolution potential possibility in Africa.
It's exciting, isn't it?
Very nice.
Yes, good. Well, to start, so the Green Revolution, as everyone knows, it sparked a pathway out of poverty and food insecurity for millions in Latin America and Asia, where soils were largely not degraded. This production-led revolution, however, missed sub-Saharan Africa, where soils are among the most degraded, low fertility soils in the world. How does soil health play a keystone role in bringing such a production-led transformation to sub-Saharan Africa?
I'm glad you brought up the question of why the green revolution traditional bypassed Africa. It occurred in Asia on alluvial soils. Irrigation water was available. Soils were renewed every year with monsoon run-on and good fertility, very deep soils. In sub-Saharan Africa, both the soil quality as well as the irrigation facilities, plus the infrastructure, those things. I joined there in '69 December, and we were trying to develop IITA farm. And the first thing that I experienced was late in the afternoon, the way the farmers make their seed bed by ridges or mounds. The temperature on the top of those ridges could be 50 degrees Celsius, 55 degrees Celsius.
Really?
And even a few days after a very heavy rainfall, the plants would be suffering from drought. The available water holding capacity of the soil was very low. Soils could get compacted very easily, crusted very easily. So the rainfall, when it comes, most of it's lost as runoff. Whatever penetrates the soil lost as evaporation. So some of these factors are so critical that even if there were improved varieties, and even if they applied some fertilizer, if they could afford it, the effectiveness, well, soils were not responsive.
Right.
And consequently, while my experimental plot showed corn grain yield of 5 tons per hectare, bean yield of really 600, 700 kilogram per hectare, on farm national level crop yield of corn was 1 ton.
Right.
And it has not really changed very much. In some cases it has, but national average on continental level is still about 1.5 tons after 50 years.
Wow.
So something is holding it back, and that is soil-related constraints for soil health.
Yeah, I think that's clear. On healthy soils, as I think you were just saying, prudent application of fertilizers can unleash the potential of improved crop varieties, and it does it economically and low risk. So why is soil health so critical to unleashing an African green revolution?
Right. Well, fertilizer is not a substitute for poor health. The soils are poor health because of other reasons, unless that part is taken care of. Adding fertilizer is more liability.
Right.
Because when you're applying them, nitrogen especially, nitrogen can be volatilized as nitrous oxide with a global warming potential of 310. Nitrogen can be leached into the groundwater, surface runoff, nitrate. So the question is how to make the soils of Africa responsive to input. That's really the question. One of the very critical factors, and the same is true in the upland soils of South Asia and the Caribbean, Central America and Andean region, is the low organic matter content of those soils. Optimum level of organic matter content in the root zone should be about 4 to 5%, which translates to organic carbon concentration about half of that, 2%, 1.5%. Most soils that I have worked with in Africa, even under forest, they have very good organic matter content, maybe 3 to 4%. But within 5 years, after 10 years for sure, with plowing, with very serious problem of runoff and erosion, high temperature decomposition rate, the organic matter content can come down to 0.5%, less than 0.5%.
Mm-hmm.
In soils of the temperate regions, the Midwest United States, we have lost organic matter content for last 150 years,
Mm-hmm.
but we have come down to about 75% of what we had before.
Mm-hmm.
We have lost about 1/3 to 1/4 over 150-year period.
Right.
In soils of Africa, I have seen loss of organic matter content from say 3%, 3.5% to 0.5%
Mm-hmm.
within 5 years.
Wow.
In 10 years, very low.
Right.
Organic matter content being low, soils are prone to crusting, compaction, runoff, erosion, high soil temperature. Under those conditions, when you apply fertilizers, they're not effective.
Right.
So the focus should be on how to make soil responsive to inputs.
Mm-hmm.
I should also mention many international centers, including IITA, CIMET, IRI, WARDA,
Mm-hmm.
ICARDA, ICRISAT. They have done a commendable job.
Mm-hmm.
I really think they've done a great job of spreading improved varieties.
Mm-hmm.
The regrettable and unfortunate part is that improved varieties cannot do their miracle if the soil conditions in which they are being grown and the environment are not optimal.
Exactly.
And for us to realize the potential of those elite varieties, the environment, the soil environment, the root zone, the rhizosphere, that has to be under optimal conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And African soils did not provide those. The management conditions did not provide that. Well, I was able to get 5 tons, 6 tons per hectare of corn yield. And the reason was I was leaving the crop residue on the soil surface.
Mm-hmm.
So you got 5 tons of grain, you got 5 tons, 6 tons of residue.
Mm-hmm.
So you leave residue on the surface, even on 15 to 20% slope, I had no runoff loss, no erosion loss.
Mm-hmm.
Soil temperature under that kind of mulch condition would be about 35 degrees Celsius compared to on a plowed bare ground 50 degrees Celsius.
Right.
And the soils under mulch will not compact.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of earthworms, a lot of termites. When you do not have a crop ready to mulch, the biological activity was not there.
Mm-hmm.
Soil was very easily crusted. So the question was, why cannot the farmers do what we were doing on experiment condition?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very important social, economical, cultural policy intervention.
Mm-hmm.
When the farmers are desperate, they need to take away everything. They take away the crop residue
Mm-hmm.
for cooking,
Mm-hmm.
for making fences, building roofs, feeding it to cattle, many other opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
making baskets. And the land is then left bare.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever is left behind, stubbles eaten by animals, livestock.
Right.
So land is left behind to fend for itself. And when the soils are degraded, putting fertilizer is not enough.
So we really have to solve the income question as well.
Absolutely.
We're going to have to get at a behavioral
Absolutely.
question. We get at that, and maybe
Right.
we can give farmers the incentive to leave that cover
Well,
crop.
I have been, in a way, Dr. Borlaug used to say the same thing that, and I am a very strong believer of that. When people are miserable, suffering, poverty-stricken, hungry, they pass their sufferings onto the land.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the land reciprocates. And one easy way to mention that link between people and land is that people are essentially mirror image of the soil and the land they live on.
Yeah.
You drive to the Midwest United States and you see that.
Yes.
And you drive to Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia and Haiti and elsewhere and you see that.
Absolutely.
So this vicious cycle of people supporting land and land supporting people, somewhere there has been an entry point.
Right.
And the entry point is to provide some inputs from the development organizations where farmers are not that desperate.
Mm-hmm.
their poverty, their social dimension, their issues are addressed,
Indeed.
so that they can then invest in land.
Mhm.
Unless that happens, I'm afraid we cannot solve the problem.
Well, let's switch to climate change, if that's okay. Farming systems on degraded soils are the least adapted and least resilient to climate change. These degraded soils are where most poor, food insecure, and climate vulnerable populations live and make their livelihoods. What approaches can provide improved climate change adaptation in such farming systems?
Thank you. That's a very pertinent question. Globally, since 1750, temperatures have already increased 1.2 degrees Celsius. The recent IPCC reports, they are increasing at the rate of 0.2 degrees centigrade per decade already. When the rate of increase is more than 0.1 degree centigrade, then is what we call global warming. Otherwise, it's a normal greenhouse effect. We are already 0.2 degrees centigrade. Agricultural practices, right from the day one, have been the source of greenhouse gases. Many people call Paul Crutzen, late Paul Crutzen got Nobel Prize in atmospheric chemistry. He used to say Anthropocene began in 1750.
Yeah.
I had to respectfully disagree. Anthropocene began with the beginning of agriculture.
Oh, wow.
8000 BC.
Right.
When people began to cultivate the land, burn the bush, clear the wetlands, drain them, and with a wooden twig try to open small furrow to plant seed in there. That is when the Anthropocene began. Since then, agriculture has been source of emission. A rough estimate is that from the beginning of agriculture till about 1750, 320 gigaton of carbon was emitted from forest deforestation, biomass burning, and the carbon stock in soil. Since 1750 to 2020, another 250 gigaton have emitted from soil, terrestrial biosphere, and vegetation. So that's about 575 gigaton from land.
Right.
Compare that fossil fuel combustion from the 1750 now, it's about 445 gigaton. So land has contributed much more.
Right.
And as a result of that, the land is degraded. Land quality. And when I talk now land, it is both the vegetation and the soil.
Right.
Now let's take the case of farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, the so-called shifting cultivation, bush fallow rotation. How do they clear the land? By burning the bush every year, burning the crop residue. Then by tractor hiring services or by hoe, scraping up the topsoil, making into ridges and mounds, and planting the crop on top of that, which again, because of high temperature, lead to emission of greenhouse gases.
Right.
So agriculture is a source of emission through biomass burning, through decomposition of crop residue, plus the other part, many soils of this semi-arid region of sub-Saharan Africa also have carbonates, which we call soil inorganic carbon.
Right.
And when soil inorganic carbon is exposed to acidity, acid rainfall, and acidifying fertilizer, that also is a source of carbon. So understanding all that and trying to find out how to minimize the emission or avoid emission and instead increase carbon in the soil by improving the residue return, by recycling the organic matter, by putting biomass from the cattle and so forth. That is the way we can return some organic matter back to the soil. So our agricultural practices have to be done that way. My personal impression is farmers in Africa, just like everywhere else, are very intelligent. They understand what they're doing.
Right.
The question is, do they have a capacity, ability? Do they have resources to do that?
Right.
That's what's holding them back.
Right. The right incentive structure.
Exactly.
So you touched on this next question a little bit in your earlier answer. Returning carbon and soil, organic matter to the soil is a critical component to improving soil fertility. However, carbon materials, as you mentioned, may have competing uses, especially for livestock.
Yes.
Something for their
Absolutely.
feed. Yeah. So what are some tools that we can use to build soil health that avoid these negative trade-offs with other components of the system? including trade-offs often for short-term grain production.
Absolutely. Very important. But United Nations Food Systems Summit, Action Track 3, especially, and I was part of that, had the idea of restoring, protecting, managing soils, especially that of Africa. That how can we improve that their capacity to be able to. So the critical component technology which we thought could be applied was conservation agriculture. Conservation agriculture has, some people think 3 components, some people think 5 components, but the critical components are no-till, leave the crop residue on the ground, do not take it away, do not burn it. Then have integrated soil fertility management, not just the fertilizer, but manure, biological nitrogen fixation, recycling, supplemented by chemical fertilizers, and complex crop rotation, corn, soybean, cassava, yam, sweet potato, millet, whatever complex rather than monoculture of one particular crop, and then integrating crops with trees and livestock. That's where agroforestry comes in. Lay farming, where you grow forages or cover crops and feed gently, not excessive grazing, but controlled grazing, eliminate burning. Technology is known. The idea is to increase input of carbon. Let me give you one example. Soil organic matter is very much like a bank account. If you want the bank account to go up, the inputs, the position into the bank must be more than what you withdraw.
Gotcha.
So same the case here. The withdrawal of soil carbon is happening by erosion, by decomposition, by leaching. The input happens from crop residue, biomass input, manure, other things. So as long as the amount of input of biomass into the soil is not more than the losses, the increase will never happen. So the philosophy is to find out how to decrease the losses by erosion, by decomposition, by leaching, and how to increase the input through crop residue management, through manuring, to cover cropping, to controlled grazing, through agroforestry. And this balance farmers do understand, but they do not have the capacity to implement. This is where translating science into action requires support from organizations like USAID, World Bank, EU countries, many. How can they make sure that the farmers' basic necessities are met? So they can reinvest back in soil. And that part is very critical. One thing which I think we could do is to pay farmer for ecosystem services. For example, if they sequester carbon in soil at the rate of 0.5 ton per hectare, pay them for what that carbon is contributing to the society as a whole. In terms of mitigating climate change, adapting climate change, improving water quality, mitigating drought, improving biodiversity, and the societal value of that carbon, not necessarily demand supply driven. I have estimated that amount to be $120 to $130 a ton of carbon. That comes to about $30 to $35 a ton of CO2. So if a farmer has 5 hectares, 12 acres approximately, and a farmer is sequestering 0.5 ton per hectare, they should be compensated about $60 per hectare per year. This will provide that incentive to reinvest. It will also achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 1 and poverty. And then also, of course, goal number 2, improve food and nutritional quality. So somewhere paying farmer for ecosystem services may be the way to bring the green revolution to Africa, as it has been the case in Asia in the past.
There's a lot of creative work going on with ecosystem services right now, and a lot of interesting proposals the UN is looking at the Intergovernmental Platform for Ecosystem Services and Biodiversity. And I'm optimistic that we're going to come up with a solution there.
I think the key point is how to determine the true value of carbon.
Yes.
There are companies, and I really salute them, and they are thinking of paying them $8, $6 per acre or something like that. And I think that's a good start, and I really think that's a commendable. But undervaluing a very precious commodity, such as organic carbon, can lead to the tragedy of the common. Take the case of irrigation in Punjab.
Yes.
The government said, we'll give you free irrigation.
Yes.
You can turn the pump on at night before you go home and let it flow all night.
Yes. Yes.
It's a waste.
Yeah.
I think the same problem applies here. If we undervalue carbon and do not give a true value to farmers, how will they find out that they should put the crop residue back?
Exactly. So it's one thing to prevent the further decline of soil health to maintain productivity and economic return, but it's another thing to reinvigorate soils that are already degraded. For those soils that are already degraded, what do you see as some of the opportunities we have yet to make full use of? Some of your early work laid the foundation for alternatives to slash and burn agriculture. What is your sense now of opportunities to integrate shrubs or trees in agricultural systems?
Thank you for that. It's really very, very nice question. First of all, let me go back to when soils are degraded, then the quality of the food produced on those soil, similar to Dr. Shakuntala was mentioning about fish, nutritional quality, which is very critical to human nutrition. Food grown on degraded soil is not of good quality.
Right.
In fact, I believe that the malnourishment is aggravated by soil degradation.
Right.
More degraded the soil, the poor quality food. There are 17 micronutrients that must be contained in the food. So sorghum, millet, corn, cassava, yam, sweet potato, teff, whatever the sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere the food commodities are, they must get adequate amount of micronutrients. Right now in Africa, soil degradation is really a very serious problem. It's a serious problem globally,
Right.
but it's especially serious in Africa. Globally, about 1/3 of all lands are degraded. But sub-Saharan Africa, especially Sahel and that West African part, most agricultural soils are degraded. And restoration of degraded soil is a much better option than deforestation and bringing more land under. And putting shrub back. You probably hear about the Green Wall project.
Right, I have.
They being started. I think that's a step in the right direction as long as we can keep the cattle out of it. Letting the natural vegetation, the plant, native plant species grow. And my colleague at Ohio State, Richard Dick, has a project funded through USAID and National Science Foundation, where he has found some native shrubs, leave them uncut, not burn them, not run, and grow sorghum millet in association with them, kind of an agroforestry technique. And they serve as a pumping device to bring water and nutrients from deeper layer so that the shallow-rooted crops grown in association can be also benefited and improve productivity. So there are a lot of options. So the key is really restoring degraded soil rather than bringing more land by deforestation, cutting. That is the real tragic that we do not address. I must say some positive things happening. UN Convention to Combat Desertification based in Bonn has a very strong program on land degradation, and they have a goal of land degradation neutrality, that by 2030, whatever land is degraded within a country, the same amount of land is restored within the country somewhere else. So the net land degradation is zero. They are really working hard to achieve that land degradation neutrality.
That's admirable.
And that's a very important concept. It's happening.
Excellent. So I've got one last big picture question for you. So finally, if we think about global challenges in food security and agriculture, alongside those in environmental conservation and biodiversity, all in the context of climate change, what do you see as the best approach or approaches? Do we need a new consensus on how to simultaneously achieve the SDGs in hunger and malnutrition, environment and biodiversity, water and climate change?
Absolutely. Sustainable development goals, 17 of them, they are interlinked. end poverty, end hunger, improve water quality, improve food security, mitigate climate change,
Exactly.
social justice, cooperation. There's really an interconnection between them and very much related to, and I think we still have 9 years to go. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has created another disruption, so food insecurity has aggravated since the COVID-19 situation. But definitely there's a strong goodwill in accomplishing the Sustainable Development Goal. The UN Food System Summit brought up a lot of coalitions to achieve just that. One of the coalitions that I was involved in is a Coalition for Action on Soil Health, especially Sub-Saharan Africa. And so far, as of last week, we have received a written endorsement from almost 115 countries.
Oh, that's exciting. Wow.
In support of soil health.
That's excellent.
Especially with relation to Africa. And the CGIAR system is involved very actively. ICRAF, based in Nairobi, ICA, IICA, based in Costa Rica, many other organizations have strongly supported it. So we all realize that soil may be a critical component to achieving Sustainable Development Goal. I do want to caution here a little bit. In the 17 goals, in the actual language of the platform of the 17 Sustainable Development Goal, the word soil was not mentioned.
Really?
And I think it's a land is mentioned.
Yes.
Land is everything between stratosphere and the bedrock.
Yeah.
Soil is the top layer was not mentioned. And yet without soil health, soil restoration, sustainable soil management, sustainable protection, you really cannot achieve many sustainable development. I was very much hoping that Secretary General's statement would mention about soil health and its management. Secretary General did mention regenerative agriculture. He did mention agroecology. He did mention a few other resource poor farmers to be addressed, but the word soil was again missed. It was not intentional, I'm sure. But I think it is about a time that we realize that to bring the green revolution to Africa, and Africa bypassed the green revolution of the 60s, this is an opportunity we can't afford to miss. Population of Africa is already more than 1 billion. It's going to be double very soon by 2050. It's going to be more than 4 billion by 2100. And therefore, educating people, especially agriculture, empowering farmers, giving them the resources, translating science into action, and understanding the key determinants that control productivity and nutritional quality. Soil cannot be ignored.
Well, Dr. Law, I fully expect that you're going to continue to raise our consciousness about the importance of soil health and soil fertility.
I think the support from USAID, I must say, is very critical, and your organizations have always done a great job. And I'm looking forward to the possibility of continuing that cooperation and excellent track record that you already have.
Thank you, Dr. Law. Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed our conversation this morning. I think that's all from Des Moines. So thank you all for joining us at AgriLinks, and we look forward to the next series of conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.